We have talked about how mass is a physical property of matter. It is something that can be measured and used to describe whatever it is that we are talking about. In the case of mass, we are talking about how much matter is present in our sample. Volume is another physical property of matter. Volume describes how much space an object occupies. This is usually what we mean when we ask how big an object is. Volume is labeled depending on the method you use to determine it. In order to measure the volume of a liquid, we need to use a special piece of equipment called a graduated cylinder. We have several different sizes of graduated cylinders in our lab, but they all measure the volume of a liquid in milliliters. Now, a liter is actually the base unit for volume, but it is a pretty large amount, just about the size of a quart. When working in the lab with liquids, liter is not such a convenient unit, so we will use milliliters when we measure the volume of a liquid. Milli is a prefix meaning 1/1000th, so a milliliter is 1/1000th of a liter. This turns around and we know that there are 1,000 milliliters in 1 liter. To use a graduated cylinder, simply add your sample of water and read the gradations. Now, one thing to notice if you are using a glass cylinder is that liquids tend to pull up a little bit along the edges. This is called the meniscus. When reading the water level, you want to be sure to read the level at the bottom of the meniscus. If we look at this particular sample, we can see that there is more than 7 milliliters of water, but less than 8. The unlabeled gradations on this cylinder represent 1 milliliter, and the water is between the third line and the fourth line. But notice it is not on the third line. It appears to be about halfway between the third and fourth gradations, so we can estimate to the 100th of a milliliter. So the recorded volume for this sample of water would be 7.35 milliliters. If you have a regularly shaped object, you can simply measure the volume using the sides. In the case of a rectangular object, we multiply the length, width, and height of the cube together to find the volume. Length is measured in centimeters, so when we multiply 3 units of centimeters, our label for volume will turn out to be cubic centimeters. Another regularly shaped object is a cylinder. While this may stump you for a second or two, remember that there are a lot of things we can measure about this object. Height is a pretty easy one to start with. The height on the cube was just how tall it was. It is the same thing for the height on a cylinder. Now, when we multiply the length times the width, what we are really finding is the area of one surface of the cube. On a cylinder, we have to take into account that the flat surface is a circle instead of a square. To find the area of a circle, we need to know its radius. From there, we simply square the radius and multiply it by pi. We can substitute in this area and multiply it by our measured height to find the volume of our cylinder. So say we want to find the volume of an object that we can't simply measure the sides. This rock is what we refer to as an irregular object since it has all kinds of angles and crevices and uneven surfaces. Since volume is the space taken up by an object, we can use a process called water displacement. We start with a known volume of water in a graduated cylinder. Please note that the cylinder itself is not crooked, just my picture-taking ability. In this case, we have an initial volume of 34.0 milliliters. When we add the rock, notice the water level rises. This is because the rock easily pushes the water out of its way when it moves through the fluid. The rock displaces the water. It displaces the water the same amount as its volume. So notice the water level went up to 36.0 milliliters. This is the same thing that happens when you get into the bathtub. If you fill the tub full and then get in, all kinds of messes are made because the water level rises when you push that water out of the way. To find the volume of the rock, we simply take the change in our volume. We subtract our final and initial volumes, and in this case, find that the volume of the rock is 2.0 milliliters. So keep in mind, volume is simply the space that an object takes up. We can find the volume in one of 3 ways. We can simply measure the sides of a regular object. If it is an irregular object, we can use water displacement. And if it's a liquid, we can just put it into a graduated cylinder and read the readings.